You shouldn't be here.
You don't own this anymore, Grant. The HOA approved the venue usage yesterday morning. That was the first thing Vanessa Holloway said to me while one of her hired security guys blocked me from walking onto my own farm. Rain tapped against the metal roof of my truck as I sat there for half a second trying to process what I was looking at. White wedding tents stretched across the lower field near the shoreline. Catering vans lined the gravel driveway. Somebody had hung ivory ribbon around the cedar fence my father built 20 years ago with his own hands. The cold morning air coming off the lake carried the smell of wet cedar, diesel fuel, and fresh mud from the shoreline, where they'd parked valet signs beside my fishing dock like it belonged to a country club now. Vanessa stood under a cream-colored umbrella and high leather boots that had never touched real dirt a day in her life. She smiled at me the same way county lawyers smile before they hand you paperwork they already know you can't stop. You can move your equipment after the ceremony, she said calmly. We're expecting almost 300 guests. One of the catering workers behind her laughed quietly while carrying flower arrangements toward my barn. That was the moment I realized this wasn't confusion. This wasn't some scheduling mistake. Vanessa Holloway had fully convinced herself she owned my land now. If you've ever dealt with HOA people like this, comment below with your city. I swear every county in America has one Vanessa Holloway hiding somewhere behind a clipboard and a fake smile. I stepped out into the drizzle and my boots sank into the mud near the lower pasture. The lake wind cut through my jacket while fog rolled low across the water behind the tents. You changed my gate locks, I said. Vanessa tilted her head like I was embarrassing her publicly. Grant, please don't make this ugly in front of vendors. There it was. That polished little tone HOA people use when they're trying to sound reasonable while stealing something from you in real time. Behind her, I spotted 2 temporary signs zip-tied onto my fence posts. Private event. Authorized access only. My jaw tightened when I saw my own ranch hands standing near the road beside their pickup trucks. One of them, Tyler, lifted both hands helplessly. Security told us we'd be arrested if we crossed the field, he called out. Vanessa sighed dramatically. Your employees were creating tension. Rainwater dripped from the brim of my cap, while thunder rolled somewhere past the lake. I looked across the field and noticed fresh tire tracks cutting directly over my irrigation lines near the shoreline. That alone was going to cost thousands. But then I saw something worse. Parked beside the equipment shed was a rented refrigeration trailer hooked into one of my farm utility panels. Somebody had broken the lock clean off the electrical box. I looked back at Vanessa slowly. Her smile faded just a little. Not fear yet, just irritation. You should have asked permission, I told her quietly. Vanessa crossed her arms. The community is tired of looking at this farm like it's some swamp nobody uses. My daughter deserves one beautiful weekend. Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice enough so only I could hear it over the rain hitting the tents. And if you ruin this wedding, Grant, I'll make sure this county buries you in lawsuits so deep you'll lose this place by Christmas. At that exact moment, another truck rolled down my gravel driveway, pulling a massive silver tank trailer toward the lower field, and my stomach dropped because I recognized the county agricultural compliance logo on the side immediately. The Silver County trailer kept rolling past me through the drizzle while Vanessa turned back toward her decorators like the conversation was already over. I stood there watching the mud churn under those heavy tires, and for the first time all morning, something colder than anger settled into my stomach. That trailer was not there for weddings. It was there because the county nutrient management cycle for my lower field was supposed to start within 48 hours. Vanessa had not just trespassed onto my property. She had planted 300 guests directly in the middle of an active agricultural compliance zone. The rain eased into a fine mist drifting off the lake, while workers unloaded white folding chairs beside the shoreline. Somebody had already covered my feed barrels with beige linen cloth to make the place look more elegant. I walked past them toward the equipment shed without saying another word. Behind me, I could hear Vanessa greeting arriving vendors in that polished country club voice of hers. We wanted something authentic, she kept saying. Nobody uses real farms anymore. My hand tightened around the rusted shed handle my father installed before he died. The lock had been snapped clean through. Inside, extension cords ran across the concrete floor toward refrigeration units, powering floral storage coolers. One of my diesel utility carts had muddy footprints all over the seat. Tyler followed me and a few seconds later carrying a coffee thermos, rainwater dripping from his jacket onto the floor. "This keeps getting worse," he muttered quietly. I took the thermos and stared out toward the tents through the open shed door. Fog rolled low over the water behind the fishing dock, while distant thunder echoed somewhere across the lake. "Did anybody touch the Westfield controls?" I asked. Tyler hesitated just long enough for me to look over at him. "The planner hired an electrician this morning," he admitted. "They were asking about power distribution near the pump station." I closed my eyes for a second. That pump station regulated the automated nutrient transfer schedule tied into the lower irrigation lanes. Nobody outside agricultural operations should have even been near it. My phone buzzed. The screen showed 3 missed calls from the county environmental office. Before I could call back, another text came through from an unknown number. "Hope you are happy destroying a young woman's special day." I looked out toward the driveway and realized residents from the HOA subdivision had started parking along the roadside to watch setup crews work. Some avoided eye contact when they saw me standing there. Others did not. A couple standing beside a pickup truck near the gravel entrance actually shook their heads at me like I was the unreasonable one. Vanessa had already framed the narrative before I even arrived home. Rich farmer refuses community wedding. Bitter local man threatens bride. That kind of story spreads fast in small counties, especially when people want entertainment. I finally called the county office back while rain ticked softly against the shed roof. A tired-sounding woman answered immediately. "Mr. Walker, we received notice your nutrient application schedule may be interrupted due to an event booking." I stared toward the shoreline, where workers were now unloading crystal glassware onto tables sitting less than 100 feet from my irrigation lanes. "I did not approve any event booking," I said calmly. Silence hit the line for half a second. Papers shuffled somewhere in the background. Then her tone changed completely. "Sir, according to our records, somebody submitted temporary access coordination forms under your agricultural permit number yesterday afternoon." Tyler looked over at me slowly after hearing that. Outside, Vanessa burst into laughter near the wedding arch while one of the decorators complimented her vision for the property. But for the first time all day, I noticed something important. The closer people got to the lower field, the more confused the vendors started looking at the equipment near the shoreline. By late afternoon, the rain had turned steady and cold, the kind that soaked through denim and settled into your bones without you noticing right away. Fog pressed low across the shoreline, while soft yellow wedding lights flickered through the mist like somebody had built a luxury resort in the middle of working farmland. I sat inside my truck near the equipment shed with the heater barely running and watched another convoy of guests arrive early for the rehearsal dinner. Expensive SUVs rolled down my gravel driveway beside muddy tire ruts left by feed trucks from 2 days earlier. Nobody seemed to notice the difference. Or maybe they just did not care. Tyler leaned against the passenger door holding his phone. "It is all over the neighborhood page now," he said quietly. He handed me the screen. Vanessa had posted smiling photos beside the lake with the caption "Community comes together for a beautiful local wedding." Hundreds of reactions, dozens of comments praising her generosity. One woman wrote, "Finally someone cleaned up that old farm." Another said, "Grant Walker has always been difficult." I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My father used to say small towns only needed one version of the truth, and usually the loudest person got to write it first. Thunder rolled over the water while rain hit the truck roof in slow, heavy taps. Then another notification appeared. Someone had uploaded a photo of me standing near the shoreline earlier that morning with the caption, "Local farmer threatens TO, shut down wedding." Vanessa was not just stealing my land now. She was building witnesses. I stepped out into the cold air and walked toward the lower field. The smell of wet cedar mixed with diesel exhaust from portable generators humming beside the tents. Near the irrigation lanes, 2 electricians stood over the utility box arguing quietly while staring at one of my pressure gauges. One of them noticed me approaching and immediately straightened up. "Sir, we were told these lines were inactive," he said carefully. "Who told you that?" I asked. The younger guy glanced toward the wedding tent before answering. "The event coordinator. She said the farm had been shut down for the weekend." I looked at the gauge myself. The pressure reading had already started climbing. Slow. Steady. The automated nutrient transfer sequence was still active beneath the field. Nobody had shut anything down because legally nobody could. Not without county authorization and environmental review. A cold knot tightened behind my ribs. Vanessa had built an entire wedding around machinery she did not understand. Before I could answer, a black luxury SUV pulled up beside the tent and Vanessa stepped out laughing with 3 women carrying garment bags. The second she saw me near the irrigation controls, her smile disappeared. She walked across the wet grass carefully, trying not to sink her boots into the mud. "You really cannot help yourself, can you?" she said under her breath. Still trying to create problems. I stayed calm. "Your vendors are asking questions because this is an active agricultural field." Vanessa folded her arms. "This is a wedding venue for one weekend. County compliance does not pause for weddings." Her jaw tightened slightly at that. Not panic yet, but the certainty in her face cracked for the first time all day. Behind us, one of the electricians quietly unplugged his tools and started backing away from the control box altogether. Vanessa noticed it too. "Do not start acting dramatic," she snapped at him. The older electrician cleared his throat awkwardly. "Ma'am, if those nutrient lines are active, nobody should be seating guests this close to the lower field." Silence settled between all of us except for rain tapping against the tent roofs and distant wind moving across the lake. Then Vanessa smiled again, but this time it looked thinner, colder. "Grant," she said softly, "if you embarrass my family after everything we invested into this event, this community is never going to forgive you." I looked past her toward the shoreline, where workers were still setting tables directly beside the irrigation markers half buried in the mud. Then I noticed something else. Somebody had covered the bright orange county warning stakes with white floral arrangements. That night the rain never stopped. Water rolled off the barn roof in heavy streams while low fog swallowed half the shoreline behind the wedding tents. By 8 o'clock the rehearsal dinner was already underway inside the main canopy, and soft jazz drifted across the field where my irrigation markers sat buried beneath flower arrangements and decorative lanterns. I stayed inside the old bait shop near the dock with Tyler and a stale cup of diner coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. The bait shop used to belong to my father before the county widened the lake road. Now it mostly stored tools and winter gear, but tonight it felt like the only place on the property still untouched by Vanessa Holloway. Through the rain-streaked windows, I could see guests moving under warm string lights, while servers carried trays of champagne across muddy ground they did not realize was part of an active nutrient runoff lane. Tyler sat quietly at the counter scrolling through community comments on his phone. "People are starting to ask questions," he said finally. I looked over at him. "About what?" "About why there are county hazard stakes under the flowers." Before I could answer, headlights swept across the gravel lot outside. A dark sedan pulled up near the dock, tires crunching slowly over wet stone. Daniel Reeves stepped out wearing a soaked charcoal coat and carrying a leather folder under one arm. Daniel had handled land disputes all over the county for 20 years, and he looked exactly like the kind of attorney who only showed up when things were already bad. He stepped inside, wiped rainwater from his glasses, and looked through the window toward the wedding tents without saying anything for a few seconds. "Please tell me she does not actually have guests seated on the lower field," he said quietly. "Almost 300 expected tomorrow," I answered. Daniel let out a slow breath and opened the folder on the bait counter. "Grant, somebody filed amended access coordination forms using your agricultural permit number and attached a forged authorization signature." Tyler looked up sharply. "Forged?" Daniel nodded once. "The county clerk flagged inconsistencies after you called earlier. Whoever submitted this knew enough terminology to sound legitimate." Rain hammered harder against the metal roof while thunder rolled over the lake again. Daniel spread photographs across the counter showing copies of permit filings, utility access maps, and event diagrams. Vanessa had submitted the lower shoreline as a temporary, inactive scenic zone. My jaw tightened immediately. There was nothing inactive about that field. Daniel tapped one page carefully. "Here's the problem. If county inspectors determine your operational controls were tampered with, they investigate you first because the permit belongs to you." For the first time since this started, real exhaustion hit me harder than anger. My father spent 30 years building this place clean enough to pass every environmental review the county ever threw at us. One false accusation tied to runoff contamination could destroy everything attached to our name. Outside, Laughter erupted from the wedding tent while headlights from arriving guests reflected across puddles in the gravel driveway. Daniel watched the crowd silently for a moment before speaking again. "Vanessa is gambling on one thing," he said. "Public pressure." I already knew he was right. Small counties did not care about technical truth once emotions got involved. They cared about appearances. A bride. A wedding. A local businessman accused of ruining it. Vanessa understood exactly how that story would spread. My phone buzzed again. Another anonymous message. "This is why nobody likes farmers anymore." A second text followed immediately after with a photo attached. Somebody had posted an image online of county warning stakes beside the tents, and now residents were arguing publicly in the comments about whether Vanessa endangered guests by hiding them. Tyler leaned closer to read. "People are turning on her now." But Daniel did not look relieved. He kept staring out the window toward the shoreline where fog drifted through the wedding lights. "No," he said quietly. "This is the part where desperate people start making reckless decisions." At that exact moment, we watched Vanessa storm out of the main tent and march directly toward the irrigation control area, with two men carrying tool bags behind her. Vanessa moved across the field fast enough to make the decorators nervous. Even through the rain and fog rolling off the lake, I could see the shift in her body language now. The polished confidence was still there on the surface, but underneath it sat something tighter, sharper. Fear had finally entered the room. The two men following her with tool bags hurried toward the irrigation controls near the shoreline, while guests inside the rehearsal tent kept drinking wine under soft yellow lights, completely unaware they were sitting 50 yards from an active agricultural transfer system. Daniel watched silently beside me through the bait shop window. "If she touches regulated controls without authorization," he said quietly, "she just moved this from civil exposure into county enforcement territory." I grabbed my jacket and stepped back into the rain before either of them could reach the control station. Mud sucked at my boots while cold lake wind pushed mist sideways across the field. By the time I reached the irrigation box, one of the contractors already had the panel open. "Stop," I said calmly. Both men froze immediately. Vanessa stopped a few feet behind them with rain collecting on her umbrella. "They are shutting down the system," she snapped. "This ridiculous situation ends tonight." The older contractor looked back and forth between us uneasily. "Ma'am, we told you earlier we are not certified for agricultural environmental controls." Vanessa lowered her voice, trying to regain that smooth HOA boardroom tone again. "Nobody is asking you to reprogram anything. Just disconnect power long enough for the ceremony tomorrow." Daniel arrived beside me then, his coat soaked dark from the rain. He pulled a county business card from his pocket and handed it directly to the contractor. "You interrupt a regulated nutrient cycle without authorization," he said evenly. "Your company becomes part of the investigation." The younger contractor backed away from the panel instantly. Vanessa stared at Daniel like she had just realized this was no longer a neighborhood argument she could bully her way through with social pressure and committee gossip. "Who exactly are you?" she asked coldly. "Counsel for Mr. Walker." That changed the atmosphere immediately. Even the rain felt quieter for a second. One of the contractors muttered something under his breath, closed the utility panel, and both men started packing their tools without another word. Vanessa's face tightened. "This is harassment," she said. "No," Daniel replied calmly. "This is documentation." Behind us, headlights rolled slowly down the gravel driveway as more guests arrived for the dinner. Some recognized the tension immediately and slowed down near the shoreline to watch. A few women near the valet stand whispered openly while staring at Vanessa. The online arguments had already reached the wedding crowd. People were starting to understand something was wrong. Then another emotional crack appeared where Vanessa least expected it. A young blonde woman stepped out from the rehearsal tent, holding her shoes in one hand to avoid the mud. Her makeup looked half-finished and her expression exhausted. I recognized her immediately from the engagement photos posted around town for months. Emily Holloway, Vanessa's daughter. The bride. "Mom," she called nervously. "The planner says vendors are asking if the property is safe." Vanessa forced a smile that looked painful now. "Everything is fine, sweetheart." Emily glanced toward the irrigation controls, then toward me. "Is it true this is still an active farm?" Nobody answered right away. Rain tapped softly against the metal utility box while fog drifted over the shoreline behind us. Finally, I looked at her and answered honestly. Yes. Emily's face changed instantly. Not outrage. Not anger. Just the kind of quiet realization people have when they suddenly understand they have been lied to for a long time. Vanessa stepped between us immediately. Grant is exaggerating because he wants attention, she said sharply. But Emily did not look convinced anymore. Then Tyler came jogging through the mud holding his phone. His face had gone pale. Grant, he said breathlessly, somebody just uploaded drone footage online. He turned the screen toward us. The video showed the entire wedding setup from above, including every single hidden county warning stake buried beneath Vanessa's decorations. The drone footage spread through the county faster than the storm moving across the lake. By 10 o'clock that night, people were standing under umbrellas near the gravel entrance pretending they were just curious neighbors while quietly recording videos on their phones. The comments online had shifted completely now. Earlier that afternoon, Vanessa Holloway looked like the woman saving a local wedding. By midnight, she looked like someone hiding warning markers on regulated farmland. I sat inside the bait shop with Daniel while rain hammered the metal roof hard enough to shake the old window frames. The smell of wet cedar and black coffee filled the room while fog pressed against the shoreline outside like the lake itself was closing in around the property. Daniel spread new documents across the counter beside an old fishing map my father used to keep there. She made another mistake, he said quietly. A serious one. He slid over a printed insurance certificate connected to the wedding vendor contracts. I scanned it slowly. My stomach tightened immediately. Vanessa had listed the property as a privately leased recreational venue instead of active agricultural land. That policy does not cover environmental exposure, I said. Daniel nodded once. Or contamination liability, or agricultural equipment incidents, or county enforcement actions. Outside the window, headlights moved slowly through the fog as another guest vehicle arrived near the shoreline. I watched people stepping carefully around puddles while workers adjusted flower arches beside the irrigation lanes. They still did not understand where they were standing. Can she shut it down now? Tyler asked quietly from the corner of the room. Daniel looked toward me before answering. Not legally. That was the moment something changed in me. Up until then, I had spent the entire day reacting, defending, explaining, trying to stop the damage before it spread any further. But sitting there listening to rain pound the roof, while Vanessa kept burying herself deeper with every decision, I realized something important. I did not need to destroy her wedding. I only needed to stop protecting her from the consequences of what she already did. My father used to say farms do not care about pride, emotions, or reputation. Systems run when they run. Rules apply whether people respect them or not. I leaned back slowly and looked at Daniel. Document everything, I said calmly. Every warning, every witness, every blocked marker, every altered lock. Daniel studied me for a second, then gave a small nod. He understood immediately. This was no longer emotional. This was strategic. My phone buzzed again, but this time it was not another anonymous insult. It was a message from someone inside the HOA board. I opened it carefully while thunder rolled low over the lake. Attached was a screenshot of an internal neighborhood email chain. Vanessa had known about the environmental schedule 3 days earlier. One message from the HOA president stood out immediately. If the farmer complains, remind him how bad this will look publicly. Another read. Once guests arrive, he will not dare interrupt the event. Tyler stared at the screen over my shoulder. They planned the pressure campaign. Yes, I answered quietly. And now they own it. Outside, voices suddenly rose near the shoreline. We looked through the fogged windows and saw a cluster of wedding vendors gathered near the lower field arguing with one of Vanessa's coordinators. 2 catering workers were loading equipment back into their truck already. A middle-aged florist stood beside them shaking her head while pointing toward the irrigation markers half visible beneath the mud. Then Vanessa appeared through the rain carrying herself with forced confidence. But the difference was obvious now. Earlier she controlled the room. Now she was chasing control before it disappeared completely. She spotted the vendors packing equipment and snapped. Nobody is leaving. The florist folded her arms. You told us this property was cleared for event use. Vanessa smiled tightly. It is under control. The florist glanced toward the shoreline, where county warning stakes poked through soaked flower arrangements. That is not what people online are saying. For the first time all night, nobody rushed to defend Vanessa. By 1 in the morning, the wedding property no longer felt like a celebration. It felt like a courtroom waiting for a verdict. The rain had slowed into a cold mist drifting across the lake, while portable heaters hissed under the reception tents beside the muddy shoreline. Guests still moved around carrying drinks and pretending everything looked normal, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Conversations stopped when Vanessa walked by now. People lowered their voices. Some looked away altogether. Others stared openly. The drone footage had spread beyond the HOA pages and into local county groups where residents started recognizing landmarks around the lower field. A retired environmental inspector commented publicly that no event should ever have been approved near active nutrient infrastructure. That single comment changed the mood faster than any legal document could have. I stood near the fishing dock holding a paper cup of stale coffee while fog rolled low over the water. Across the shoreline, workers quietly removed floral arrangements from around the hidden warning stakes after vendors threatened to walk out entirely. Nobody argued with them anymore. Not even Vanessa. She was standing near the valet tent speaking sharply into her phone while rain collected on her hair and shoulders. Every few seconds, she glanced around to see who might be watching. The answer was everyone. Tyler walked over beside me and nodded toward a group of HOA residents gathered under umbrellas near the gravel drive. "That is the board president," he said quietly. "The one from the emails." I recognized him immediately. Richard Bellamy. Expensive coat. Nervous posture. The kind of man who loved authority until accountability showed up. He was avoiding Vanessa completely now. Earlier that week, they probably looked unstoppable together. Tonight, he would not even make eye contact with her in public. Daniel joined us near the dock, carrying another folder tucked beneath his arm. "County enforcement just sent a formal advisory notice," he said calmly. "No direct shutdown order yet, but they documented unauthorized interference concerns tied to the property." "Meaning?" Tyler asked. Daniel looked toward the shoreline where guests were whispering while checking their phones. "Meaning nobody here can say they were not warned anymore." That landed harder than I expected. Because public humiliation in small counties does not arrive all at once. It spreads quietly, through silence, through distance, through people suddenly deciding not to stand beside you anymore. Vanessa finally spotted Richard near the driveway and marched toward him through the mud. Even from 50 feet away, I could tell she was furious. "You told me this was handled," she hissed loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. Richard kept his voice low. "I told you to keep the event away from marked zones." Vanessa laughed bitterly. "Oh, now you are worried." A couple standing nearby immediately stepped away, pretending not to listen. Richard adjusted his collar nervously and glanced towards several residents openly filming the argument now. "Vanessa," he muttered carefully, "you need to stop talking before this gets worse." That was the exact wrong thing to say to someone losing control in front of an audience. Her composure cracked completely for the first time all night. "Worse?" she snapped. "I built half this community. None of these people would even know each other without me." Nobody answered her. Not Richard. Not the guests. Not even the residents who used to follow her around every HOA meeting like assistants orbiting a celebrity. The silence around her became its own kind of punishment. Then Emily appeared again near the shoreline wrapped in a gray coat over her rehearsal dress. Her eyes looked exhausted now. She glanced at her mother, then toward the crowd filming everything on their phones. "Mom," she said softly, "people are leaving." Vanessa turned toward the parking area immediately. 3 vendor trucks were already pulling away through the fog and drizzle toward the county road. Around 2:30 in the morning, the entire property felt suspended in that strange silence small towns fall into right before public disaster becomes official. The rain had stopped completely now, leaving only cold fog drifting over the lake and water dripping steadily from tent corners onto the muddy shoreline below. Most guests had retreated inside the reception canopy where nervous conversations blended with the soft clinking of untouched wine glasses. Nobody looked relaxed anymore. People kept checking their phones, watching updates, whispering. Every few minutes, another resident quietly slipped out toward the parking area without saying goodbye to Vanessa. I stood near the dock with Daniel while county trucks rolled slowly down the gravel driveway one after another, their headlights cutting through the fog like courthouse searchlights. The first truck belonged to environmental compliance. The second belonged to the sheriff's department. The atmosphere changed instantly the moment those vehicles stopped near the shoreline. Conversations inside the wedding tent died almost immediately. Even the musicians stopped playing. Sheriff Tom Grady stepped out first, wearing a brown rain jacket over his uniform and carrying a clipboard beneath one arm. I had known Tom most of my life. He glanced at me briefly, then toward the lower field where county warning stakes sat half uncovered beside expensive flower displays, soaked from rain. "This the active zone?" he asked calmly. "Yes," I answered. Vanessa appeared seconds later, moving quickly across the mud with forced confidence written all over her face. "Sheriff, thank God you are here," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "This entire situation has been exaggerated by a hostile property owner trying to sabotage a wedding." Tom did not answer her immediately. Instead, he looked toward the environmental officer already photographing irrigation markers near the shoreline. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "did you authorize concealment of county safety indicators on regulated agricultural land?" The silence after that question felt heavier than the storm earlier. Vanessa blinked once. "Those decorations were temporary. That was not my question." People nearby started slowly backing away from her again. Even Richard Bellamy stayed near the valet tent, pretending to take a phone call rather than standing beside her publicly now. Vanessa noticed it too. Her authority was disappearing in real time. Daniel handed Sheriff Grady copies of the forged coordination forms and HOA email screenshots while the county officer continued documenting equipment placement near the irrigation lanes. Nobody raised their voice anymore. Nobody needed to. The facts themselves had become humiliating enough. Emily stood near the reception entrance wrapped in a blanket while watching her mother lose control piece by piece under county floodlights reflecting across wet gravel and puddles. "Mom," she whispered quietly, "did you know about the warnings?" Vanessa turned toward her daughter with visible panic for the first time all night. "Emily, do not do this here." But Emily did not move closer. That hurt Vanessa more than anything else so far. Sheriff Grady flipped through the paperwork slowly while fog drifted behind him across the shoreline. "At this point," he said calmly, "the county is recommending immediate suspension of all event activities near the lower field pending environmental review." Several guests started walking toward their vehicles immediately after hearing that. Nobody argued. Nobody defended Vanessa. One of the catering managers quietly instructed his staff to begin removing alcohol service from the property altogether. Then another emotional blow landed. Richard Bellamy finally approached the sheriff looking pale and exhausted. "The HOA board held an emergency call 20 minutes ago," he muttered. Vanessa stared at him in disbelief. Richard swallowed hard before continuing. "They voted to suspend Vanessa Holloway from all board activities effective immediately, pending investigation." For a second, she looked like she genuinely could not process what she had just heard. The woman who spent years controlling neighborhood meetings, issuing violation notices, and humiliating residents over mailbox paint colors was suddenly standing alone in Cold Lake fog, while county officials documented evidence around her. Then her phone started vibrating nonstop in her hand. She looked down at the screen once, and all the color drained from her face. Somebody had leaked the HOA email chain publicly. 3 weeks later, the wedding tents were gone, the floodlights were gone, and the shoreline finally sounded like itself again. Cold morning wind moved quietly across the lake while fog drifted low over the water and wrapped around the cedar fence near the dock. I stood beside the reopened front gate, holding a fresh cup of coffee while Tyler backed a pickup truck slowly down the gravel driveway, carrying replacement irrigation markers for the lower field. The county had cleared the farm completely 2 days earlier. No violations, no contamination findings, no operational negligence. Every investigation pointed back toward unauthorized interference, concealed warning indicators, and falsified event coordination forms tied directly to Vanessa Holloway and multiple HOA communications. The silence after that outcome felt better than any argument ever could. Across town, the story had already turned into local legend. People talked about it inside diners, hardware stores, and church parking lots like they were discussing a storm everyone survived together. Nobody defended Vanessa anymore. The leaked email chain destroyed whatever authority she used to have in the community. Residents who once followed her around HOA meetings now crossed the street to avoid her entirely. Richard Bellamy resigned from the board less than a week after county investigators interviewed him. 2 other board members followed right behind him. The emergency HOA audit uncovered years of selective enforcement complaints and unauthorized coordination tactics hidden behind neighborhood beautification language. By the end of the month, the association attorney recommended a full restructuring vote from residents. Vanessa tried fighting everything at first. She blamed vendors, claimed misinformation, threatened lawsuits online. But every angry post only pushed more people away. The worst part for her was not legal exposure. It was social collapse. Nobody invited her anywhere anymore. The same community she used to control with polished smiles and passive-aggressive pressure had turned completely silent around her. Even Emily moved out of the subdivision quietly after the canceled wedding. One afternoon, she came to the farm alone carrying a handwritten letter addressed to me. She apologized for what happened and admitted she never knew how much had been hidden from her until that night by the shoreline. I never blamed her. Children do not always see who their parents really are until power disappears. Daniel eventually helped me file recovery claims for property damage, unauthorized utility use, destroyed irrigation sections, and trespassing violations. Insurance investigators became very interested once they discovered the event policy intentionally misrepresented active agricultural land as recreational property. The financial fallout spread fast after that. Vendors sued for unpaid balances. The venue planner sued over disclosure failures. Even the florist filed a complaint after county reports confirmed hazard markers had been intentionally concealed beneath decorations. In the end, the thing Vanessa feared most finally happened. Public embarrassment became permanent record. But the part that stayed with me the longest was not the investigation or the legal victory. It was the morning after county clearance when I unlocked the farm gate before sunrise and realized nobody was standing there trying to control my property anymore. Just cold air, wet cedar, rainwater dripping from the barn roof. The lower shoreline looked damaged but alive. Recoverable, kind of like me. I spent the next few weekends restoring the old bait shop with Tyler while geese drifted quietly across the foggy lake every morning. For the first time in months, the farm felt like home again instead of contested territory. Looking back now, the entire disaster started because one person believed appearances mattered more than boundaries, laws, and basic respect. Vanessa thought social influence could override consequences. She thought public pressure would force everyone else to stay quiet while she took whatever she wanted. But communities eventually notice patterns. They notice manipulation. They notice arrogance disguised as leadership. And once people stop being afraid of someone, the collapse happens fast. The biggest lesson in all of this is simple. Never mistake temporary social power for permanent control. Because the moment truth reaches daylight, even the loudest people in town can end up standing alone in silence. As for me, I still drive past the shoreline every morning before sunrise with coffee in hand, checking irrigation pressure and listening to lake wind move through the cedar trees. The county replaced the damaged warning stakes with new reflective markers last week. Nobody hides them anymore. And every time fog rolls over the water now, I remember how close I came to losing everything my father built because somebody thought my land was just scenery for their image. If you made it this far, rank the story from 10 to 0. I would love to know what you think. But around here, people still talk quietly about one detail from that night that never fully got explained. According to county maintenance logs, the automated nutrient transfer cycle near the lower shoreline activated exactly on schedule less than 12 hours after the wedding evacuation order. Meaning if guests had stayed on that field through the ceremony like Vanessa originally planned, the disaster would have become far worse than public humiliation.